I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs and small business owners. My grandfather was really the first small business owner that I knew because we had barbecue restaurants down in South Florida that had passed on from generation to generation. So if you're personally connected to me on LinkedIn or Facebook, actually, and you see me posting some of my grilling exploits, it's really from learning through
Family
osmosis.
root.
Grandpa, yeah, it's rooted in family. So that's where it started. Just observing, family around me, and but my family were firm believers in education. I call it lower middle class upbringing with higher middle class values, right? And so very strong proponents of education, and so really I kind of felt like I had a entrepreneurial spark even at that early age, but really didn't think of it that way. I knew I had goals, but just to kind of give you a little bit of that kind of growth story, I did my undergrad in accounting, and so started my career in public accounting out of college and worked for Deloitte. And after 4 years at Deloitte, decided that I wanted to broaden my horizons a bit, and went to pursue my MBA at Wharton. And then after Wharton, I went into consulting, big company consulting. Started my career with A.T. Kearney, moved on from A.T. Kearney to Accenture, but all of my experience and time in consulting was really spent in the procurement and supply chain area. So helping big companies on large scale procurement transformation and strategic sourcing projects. So that's kind of where I landed, kind of having the accounting background, and then sort of being leveraged on these procurement, large scale procurement engagements with Accenture and Kearney, and that's really where I became kind of viewed as a subject matter expert in the area, and then my consulting path led me being recruited by a client who happened to be based in Cincinnati, and that client happened to be Cincinnati Bell, and that's what brought me to Cincinnati probably 18 years ago.
I have to go back to the early experience in the family. Was there anything in that family business that seeded your appreciation for the procurement and the supply chain space? Because obviously a business that heavily relies on, quality and the like, but any early seeds there?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny when we run into, technical problems. Oftentimes you complain, the lack of technology, or we become so reliant on, systems. And I think part of what allows us to create like cool technology, great technology, efficient technology is when you have done the work, rolled up your sleeves and done the work manually. So, I remember trying to introduce some new ways of, tracking, inventory and applying some cool concepts nowhere near what we have now to my grandfather and my uncles. And they knew this stuff in their head. Like they could just look at a slab of ribs and tell you how much it weighs, right? And of course, these smart aleck kids want to pull out these computers and calculators and all that stuff to calculate stuff. So I think it was just taking being book smart was valued, but I think having good common sense and good judgment was probably valued more highly, in my family as it related to business and running the business. It's like, what if we'd probably be in a world of hurt if, we lost, our internet connections these days, right? Or didn't have calculators and computers. Whereas back in the day, I can still hear my grandfather saying, "Hey, what would you do if you didn't have any of that stuff? What do we do before this stuff, right?" So all this fancy stuff, I can hear him now. But I think it was really just solving a problem that I didn't necessarily have a passion to be an entrepreneur for the sake of being an entrepreneur, but I was passionate about like making things easier and solving problems. So I think that's probably, you know, is really my passion, is being a problem solver. I think that's what drove me to consulting, the idea of solving big problems to help a lot of people.
So fast forward to Cincinnati Bell. What unique challenges did you face, and what unique contributions did you make?
I think what was interesting about working at Cincinnati Bell and, you know, sort of moving from a consulting role where typically you go in and you would make, you know, do a lot of analysis, you would gain a lot of input, and you would create some recommendations, and then you may or may not be involved in the implementation of it. You know, the interesting thing about it, the executive team at Cincinnati Bell, you know, Jack Cassidy, Brian Ross, were like, well, hey, these are great recommendations, but we need somebody to implement them and be responsible for them day in and day out. So that was an opportunity for me to move from being a sort of kind of strategic, sort of, yeah, be a part of the solution, right? Ongoing solution. And so that was a great challenge for me, and that I was challenged from the standpoint of really going into a very sort of engineering, technical driven organization, where, first of all, the function of procurement had been pretty decentralized at the time. So and then during those days, you weren't getting a lot of the synergies and savings and efficiencies that you could if it were centralized. So I think it was the challenge of, you know, creating an organization in a strategically focused versus tactically focused procurement organization that gained the credibility of those internal stakeholders that drove most of the spend. That was the big challenge. And and we had some good success in doing that, in driving savings. You know, we had great, great support from, you know, Jack, you know, the CEO, and Brian Ross, CFO, and so I think that was the challenge for me, and the satisfaction in that we were able to solve this problem of, you know, credibility that procurement had not been able to gain over the years. So to bring, you know, kind of a new organization with a new strategy and a strategic plan to bear to help really drive that and really take the company to a better place. And so that was
on that for a moment, Rod. So what's interesting about when you work there is that, you know, the whole telecom industry is under massive disruption, you know, broadband taking over, you know, players are entering the market that you probably would have never imagined. You know, I guess on one hand, you've got the challenge of protecting the savings from procurement where there's a certain degree of stability, but then you've got so many other changes in the business model. How do you balance the two?
Well, that's another, I mean, I think that's something that's carrying through procurement today.
Exactly.
There was so much, you know, back in those days, the focus was really, you know, we're trying to get the best price. Like you're buying everything like it's a commodity. But when you start moving into a where you're selling services that like really aren't commodities, you can't always buy, you know, I mean, if you're trying to sell DSL service, but you're trying to sell DSL service to, you know, a upper level segment of the population, right, under some signature service, you may not be able to just buy the cheapest DSL modem. Like obviously, it's, you know, an outdated example, but it's all about sourcing value. So I think we were seeing that happen then, where you're moving from not just choosing the supplier with the best price, but choosing the supplier with the best value. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing more buyers, more procurement executives, not as focused on just price anymore, but they're focused on the quality, you know, the product roadmap, you know, what's your product gonna look like 3 years from now? What's the content of your product? You know, we want to understand how the, you know, diversity drove development of this product, right? You know, do you have a supplier diversity program? They want to know about your sustainability programs. So
Hold that thought. We're going to get to that in a second. I want to hear more about the Rod story. So, okay, so you get hired by Cincinnati Bell as a consultant. CEO Jack Cassidy says, "Hey, dude, stick around. We need to put this into action." Then what happened? You know, I want to kind of cover the sequence before we get to the big epiphany for the startup.
Yeah. So essentially, we were successful in taking a significant, some significant dollars out of supply chain. Obviously, profitability, EBITDA growth was significant. So the focus was definitely on cost reduction back in those days. And so, you know, our team was credited with, you know, taking a pretty hefty chunk, you know, some millions of dollars in cost reductions, you know, out of
a very competitive industry.
Yeah, in a very competitive industry, and it wasn't, and it didn't end there, right? I mean, we were continuing to figure out, you know, which way to go. I still recall, you know, the wireless business being an area that, you know, was probably the fastest growing area, but we were still, you know, starting to look at this whole entertainment bundle. And it's amazing to see where things are today versus, you know.
Yeah.
But so then after doing that job for 3 years, our CFO, Brian Ross at the time, he was really good and very much of the mindset that people need to kind of move around into different roles. And so I got some additional responsibility as a divisional controller. And so that was great, great experience for me, kind of given the fact that I was a CPA, MBA finance. I think Brian's always looking at growth opportunities for people and succession planning. But then I got this spark to do more, you know, helping companies solve problems, right? So I started I decided to leave and start a consulting firm that focused on helping companies not only take costs out of procurement and supply chain, but at the same time, as we're finding these sourcing improvement opportunities, let's marry that with, you know, diverse suppliers, right? So if you can actually
So where are we in the time frame? Around 2010 or so, or
this is around 2005.
2005. Okay.
So this is 2005.
Started consulting. Okay.
Started consulting firm, and we started working with a lot of large companies. I had fortunately had connections to, you know, procurement executives from my days, and, you know, big company consulting, you know, even through relationships that I had developed, and so I saw an opportunity to help, you know, other companies achieve, you know, driving savings in sourcing, but also, you know, increasing their diverse supplier spend at the same time, which were sometimes viewed as competing objectives. But one of the things I set out to do was prove that if done right, you can achieve both.
And how big an issue was that? I mean, we would say today it's still an opportunity, but back then I have to believe it will be pretty glaring for a lot of companies, no?
Yeah, a lot of companies were, you know, just getting started, like wanting to, you know, figure out where should we start. And oftentimes, you know, to do the data analysis was a manual, you know, bear of a process, you know, just trying to get your arms around. Yeah, a lot of companies had procurement spend in different systems. So, you know, I would have an analyst, you know, working with me on projects where it might take, you know, 8 weeks to just get a full enterprise-wide view of the spend, right? And then, you know, you got to categorize that spend and make sure it's classified, and then you got to scrub it. If you're adding a diversity element onto it, you need to understand, like, okay, of these suppliers, who's diverse, who's not, so that we can kind of, you know, do a snapshot spend or baseline. And that was where, you know, I started realizing, wow,
maybe there's a scalable model.
Yeah, maybe there's a way to do this, and that's really where the light bulb started going off for Connexus, and it was during, you know, doing the consulting work and doing a lot of manual labor to make make pretty graphs and dashboards, right? You know, this stuff looks great. Oh, this looks great. Well, yeah. After.
So when did you know, like, you know, when did that it's more than just a light bulb. I mean, it's a life commitment where consulting is one where you got, and then it's like tech-based startup to scale this process. That's a pretty big choice. I mean, tell us about that moment.
Well, that's why. So honestly, yeah, before I even started the consulting practice, I was thinking about a sort of tech-driven solution. But to your point, yeah, I know that's a huge commitment. That's why it took so long to do it, right? Because, again, I'm a problem solver. Like I didn't wake up one day and say, oh man, I want to be an entrepreneur. I'm gonna start this company and raise money and go exit. I was really truly solving a problem. And yeah, I mean, starting a consulting firm is a lot different because with a consulting firm, you don't have to make a commitment to employees. I was able to, leverage my network for expertise, 1099 basis, didn't have to hire, make those full-time hires. Yeah, when you're starting a company, particularly a tech company, you have to make the commitment to the payroll because you gotta, I mean, especially if you're selling into these large companies, these Fortune 500s, your product has to be, on point.
Yeah.
Sure.
And you had to build early supporters. I was on PitchBook or CB Insights, digging up a little history, and I noticed that one of your early investors was I think John Pepper jumped in. But tell us about the process of just selling the vision. I mean, that's something everybody listening here is probably thinking, okay, I may have a great idea, I may have thought about it for a long time, but I got to get out there and sell others on joining in the mission.
Well, it really just started as not necessarily, it really wasn't selling. I don't mind the vision. So, maybe that's a great way to think about it.
Evangelizing,
It's,
enrolling.
I say at first, it's before you sell it, I think you have to share it, right? So,
Okay. All right.
so I'll call it sharing the vision with friends and former colleagues. Just say, hey, I got this idea. I'm thinking I'm onto something here, and I think that's really what starts it. Like that starts the snowball, right? That's the beginning of the snowball, and
you're also making others co-creators in a way.
Yeah, you really are, because once you share it with someone and they catch the fever, then they introduce you to somebody else, and there's this whole network effect that happens. And so, and so it was really, in fact, I had shared it with a friend of mine, Chris Downey, who I don't know if you've met.
Yeah, I know Chris.
Chris is actually the one.
Spark People.
Yeah, Spark People. Yep. And so it was really Chris that, introduced me to John, and then obviously that led to other introductions. But it's really sharing it first, and then you start to attract folks that share the passion or see the, definitely see the vision, and they may even see it in ways, that are a little bit different than you, but maybe bigger, more ideas. So that kind of feeds it. And then from there, before you know it, you've attracted sort of a group of people who become valuable advisors, and providing access to their time. Maybe they invest money, but I think more than anything, just giving you feedback, honest feedback.
So what was your first product? When did you realize, okay, I've got something, I've got something real? Because obviously that's important before you bring in, other investors too. They got to, show me the money, but when did things start to click from okay, I think I'm onto something?
Well, it's interesting. It might not be where you think. What really, and this was before we landed our first big one, which was McDonald's. But it was really, I guess, when I saw the value of the data, it was an insurance company that. So when I first started a company, it was interesting because I never really wanted to sell to big companies. Honestly, I wanted to build this database of high quality, diverse suppliers, and then connect those, diverse suppliers to procurement opportunities. So it's really creating a large database, unlike, a robust database, unlike any other. And that was the asset I was looking to build. But I realized that in order to, have the credibility, you're going to have to pursue both sides. You're going to have to pursue not only the supply side, but the demand side as well. And so that's when, I knew that the supply chain, supply chain transparency and supplier transparency around diversity and soon to come, green and sustainability and all that stuff would follow. But it was then that I realized that if we provide this valuable data enrichment service as kind of the baseline product, that was kind of the first product outside of just having a small database of a couple thousand suppliers in it. That would be what enabled us to exponentially grow the size of our database, which when we were acquired, it was around 2 million suppliers or so. That's what really made me realize there was value when we started we had a couple of insurance companies and a couple of other organizations who wanted to pay us.
Yeah, exactly.
Access that database. Like we had one insurance company, one that you would know. They were looking to increase the number of diverse agents, and so even though we were kind of a small business or a diverse supplier platform, they realized that they could attract entrepreneurs just kind of based on their knowledge of the market, that if they could advertise where diverse entrepreneurs were, they would attract potential agents, right, to buy franchises and such. And so that's when I knew there was some value in the data long term, right? And so that we could have gone down that path and
That's
just kind
what
of
I love about
right.
That's what I love about the startup world. I mean, you don't really know what your value proposition is until you jump in. And even with my startup, Planet Feedback, I thought certain industries would gravitate to it. I didn't expect the auto industry to go gaga model, but that was, a great insight, and you kind of learn as you go and you adapt accordingly. Now, one of the questions that came through is, you were I think it was about a 9-year window from starting Connexus to acquisition. And credit to you for, usually there's always like a, CEO kind of change in that long a period, but you kind of carried it all the way down the line. Can you just talk about that journey, and were there any big pivot points? Were there any pivots where you thought, oh my gosh, I'm running out of money, but I know this thing is viable? Can you just take us into your, a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have a big ego, right? So it's interesting. I would often.
What I love about you, you got that Midwest humility. That's why I came back to the Midwest.
Hey,
humble overachievers.
Yeah, well, I was not. I would always question myself. Periodically, I would say, hey, am I the right person to continue running this? Should I be doing something different to add value to the company? So, if I had investors come to me and say, hey, maybe we should bring in a new, CEO and let you focus on, more of the this marketing and ambassador stuff, I would not have been opposed to that, because at the end of the day, I really wanted to focus on, the company succeeding. I wanted to see the mission continue, at all costs, right? To me, that's the most important thing. What's best for the company. But along the journey, this was like really my first rodeo, right? In terms of a true startup, and the learnings were incredible. And, will I do it again? Yeah, maybe. I'm happy with Coupa, and I think there's some great opportunities to continue the vision. But yeah, if I did do it again, man, would I apply some learnings to it? Along the journey, I think about the challenges in raising capital. It took us, we raised a total of about 12 million. I think in terms of strategy and planning around when to bring investors in, when to take investors out, when to, how to plan the cap table would look totally different. Like I feel like what transpired was really, a stumbling forward, if you will, right? You're headed towards this mission, but then, you end up having to pivot along the way, and, you may have to take money on terms that aren't ideal, but that's part of the growth, right? That's part of the learning. And I think that is, a big watch out. There is also, the issue of the time it took to raise the capital. That 12 million, the first 5 million, it probably took 3 years to raise, right? So there was a period of time where you really couldn't think, much further than, the end of your nose. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is, learnings for me in terms of changes in the people, like people on the team that were great to get you from point A to point B, may not be the same people that you need to take you from,
Yeah.
to point J, right? And
No,
so
exactly.
the organization piece is important. And then I also think it's important to make sure that you're getting, the input that you need, from your board and from your advisors and things like that. And I think there comes a time too when, there are, board members and advisors that are great, from certain phases to certain phases, but then
Right.
once you get beyond that, then not so good, right? So yeah, I mean, I stayed, in the CEO seat, until the end, which was, which was great, but it was not something like, I don't view it as a badge of honor. I just,
Yeah.
even if it hadn't been, and we still, got the company to exit with me being, in another role, CFO or whatever, would have been fine. Would have been fine with me. But there are definitely some lessons that I learned along the way as it relates to, the biggest lessons really on capital and managing the cap table and, you know, organization leadership in having the right people in the right, and that includes board level.
Well, tell us about the, you know, the strategic choice around exit. I mean, obviously there's a lot of different paths you can go. Sometimes you don't always have the choice, but in the case of Coupa, you had a major player in procurement and beyond that brought this opportunity to kind of scale Rod's vision. How did that come about? How did you think about it? Did you feel any dissonance? And how are you kind of, ensuring that it actualizes the way it should?
So Coupa,
and give us a little bit of background on the company too. So
when we were on the path to raising Series B, we had started to receive, as we were partnering with multiple procure to pay platforms, companies, we had received interest from one initially, and then we got some other interest. But basically, once we started getting that M&A interest, the board said, hey, we should, let's bring a banker in and help us, kind of sift through it, and let's make sure we're, doing the right thing for the company. So, I mean, Coupa has shown interest pretty early on. In fact, it was pretty clear that there were partnering opportunities because we had some shared customers. But what I really liked about Coupa, and like even more now, but even before I knew as much as I know now, is that Coupa really is the only procurement player, and I'll say procure to pay for lack of a better term, because that's what people, understand. But Coupa's taken procurement from tactical to strategic by establishing a whole new category called BSM, business spend management, right? And so I think that's important to note. So for me, like looking at
Can you say that again? Say BSM or VSM?
BSM, business spend management. So,
Spend
so
management.
Coupa really has created that category, and really what that means is managing every single dollar that a company is dealing with. It. You know, every company that goes out the door, you know, it should go through the Coupa platform for visibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was clear that supplier diversity and inclusion was mission centric at Coupa, you know, and really acquiring Connexus was like the next logical step in creating this, you know, all-inclusive platform. So now, you know, now Connexus, you know, we were able to boast having this largest, you know, database of diverse suppliers, you know, vetted and validated, you know, Coupa, you know, global, you know, business spend management company, $20 billion now market cap, you know, 2,100 employees, you know, almost 2 trillion in spend running through the
Yeah.
platform. Now we can, yeah, we can track, you know, we can help you with the compliance, spend tracking and reporting, diverse supplier discovery. But now we can really help our customers make a difference because now we can connect the suppliers with the spend. So we bring it together now. And so now imagine a world where you're a buyer, you know, at a P&G or, you know, Intel, and now as opposed to you having to look after the fact, you can actually put, you know, supplier diversity into your workflow. You know, as POs are being cut, as decisions are being made, you can actually see on your dashboard the benefit of buying from this diverse supplier versus buying from the incumbent. And so that's the power of what is.
I mean, I mean, you know, I don't work.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of it. So like I'm really so I'm really pleased with it, and yeah, and so you know I'm being you know tasked with leading you know these efforts around you know how do we drive you know you know supplier inclusion across the entire Coupa ecosystem, right, and enable our customers you know to reach you know their collective supplier inclusion goals. And so that's what really excites me.
And how do you define that? Because we've got a couple terms you and I have been talking about in the past. There's supplier inclusion. I want you to help the audience understand that. And then you and I have also talked about responsible sourcing, in which we've kind of put sustainability, diversity into that mix. So how should we be talking about this?
So supplier diversity, everybody understands that in North America, you know, in the U.S. But the reason I like to use supplier inclusion is because it's more of a global term, and you know, as we start to drive these efforts outside of the U.S., which is happening, it's happening really because like U.S. based companies that are global are wanting to measure the impact they're having in procurement in these markets around the world. So we call it supplier inclusion because that would be all encompassing. But you know, oftentimes you'll hear them together, supplier diversity and inclusion. But there are different definitions of diversity and inclusion depending on where you are. I know, like you know, in you know in South Africa, in the UK, right, in Australia, there are some differing definitions, but at the end of the day, everybody's trying to accomplish the same thing. It's about economic impact. I mean, like when we talk about small businesses being the engine of the economy, the fuel of the economy in the U.S., that's the same story everywhere. No one would disagree with you if you were, you know, on the stage at the United Nations, right, talking about this, because everybody understands that small businesses fuel economies, and in the U.S., small businesses make up 99% of all businesses. And then of that, 50% of those, all businesses in the United States are either minority or woman owned. However, they only represent 7% of the total revenue. So that's a huge disparity. And despite the fact that they drive, 2/3 of the jobs, net new jobs, that gap still exists. So
2/3 of net new jobs and 7% of the revenue.
yeah.
All right. That sounds like a business opportunity to me.
Yeah.
Now you and I are both on a task force in Greater Cincinnati around supply chain, new commerce, and you'll recall from the last couple discussions, there's almost unanimous sense that we're entering this period of radical transparency. It's a big reason why we're doing this conference on the top. Do you think we've hit a tipping point on that? Because if it is true that whether from a B2B or a consumer to business perspective, you're just going to be able to see through the supply chain into what's there, whether it's responsible sourcing, sustainability, whether it's diverse or inclusive makeup. Do you believe that's real?
Yeah,
I mean, I do. Coupa did because they acquired you, but maybe
yeah.
it's even.
Well, it is even bigger. I think that all falls in line with the impending consumerization of procurement. So I've long believed that buyers are people, right? So buyers at companies are people. Those same people buy stuff on Amazon. They buy stuff on websites.
They're used to reviews, a million photos, video demo.
They're going to want to buy at work the same way they buy at home. And so as I thought about that, I just posted an article that by former A.T. Kearney colleague, at least she co-authored it, and Coupa, I think Coupa may have co-sponsored the article, but it was basically talking about the consumerization of procurement. And it doesn't surprise me at all that we're starting to see that more and more because, systems have long been underinvested. I mean, that was one of the reasons I saw the opportunity, for Connexus. And, if you talk to, CPOs, like the one I talked to a CPO not too long ago, and, one of the things that he said is that eventually he'd like to get to a point where he could buy one procurement solution that had the best in breed of everything, but that's hard to do, right? Because, there's always going to be somebody that can come and go double click, and be really, really good at it, right? But basically he's saying that he said, I'm so glad because this customer happened to be a Connexus customer before, and they were also a Coupa customer. So this is a customer that, we're working with on some other things. But he said, hey, I had the best in breed supplier diversity solution, best in breed procure to pay solution, and one acquired the other. He said, that's a beautiful thing. That's what we all want. He said, ideally, we wouldn't have to go and buy all these different solutions to stitch together, a solution. But that's often what's happened in the past. But I think we're getting closer, like with a Coupa, I think we're closer than we've ever been to a single platform with, multiple best in breed solutions to kind of create this one best in breed, right?
And then Rod, you were quoted pretty prominently in, I thought, a really good Christian Science Monitor article. I think it was a cover article, something with the headline of, corporate America confronts racism, why this time may be different, kind of suggesting that, solutions like what you're providing are actually part of the answer to the new accountability. And any commentary on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I'll repeat what I said. I mean, to the extent that, there is some concern about this not being sustainable and long lasting. Like, I really do believe that we're at a tipping point in regards to, racial equity, equality. I think that in the past, the playbook has been pretty, straightforward, come out, make a statement and, make a couple of contributions here and there. I'm definitely seeing more. I mean, I'm talking to customers every day, talking to partners every day, and there is definitely a concerted effort to make long-lasting change. And I believe that, there's just a high correlation between, economic inequality and racial inequality, right? And I feel like procurement is such a powerful player in this that, the multiplier effect of now diversity hiring is fantastic. I think everybody realizes the value of that. But when you're directing, $1 million in spend to a small and diverse business, that's going to have a multiplier effect. Like I think about when, Connexus was born as a new innovation, maybe I had three employees. Once we landed that McDonald's contract, we went from 4 to 11 employees.
Off to the races.
Had that same impact had they just decided to go with D&B or IBM or whoever else we provide. And so that's the power of procurement, and that, oh yeah, well, we could hire a guy like Rod to come in and build this for us internally, but by making that investment with procurement dollars, they helped create a company that ended up having 30 employees. You know what I mean? So
exactly.
And procurement comes in. It's just, we just need to, we need to mainstream it. We need to mainstream.
Right. Well, let's pivot in these last few minutes to the issue of building on a question I just received from Hans in the audience about the ecosystem. And what do you think needs to evolve in our ecosystem to nurture more startups, maybe nurture even more startups in this area, which we know is, there's probably a lot of opportunity. You and I have kind of, we've kind of hacked a few ideas on the consumer side, but what needs to happen, any step change, and any advice for me and my team, but like what, we want more Rod Robinsons. We want to get on the map globally, not just nationally, and we want to make a positive impact. That's what most all entrepreneurs, right?
Yep. So here's my view, and I thought about this, as you kind of sent me a note last night, I said I wanted to really think about it, and obviously I'm going to be a part of the solution, right? Because I'm on the team, and I want to help. But I think in terms of the local startup ecosystem, it has improved significantly. We still got work to do for sure, but like starting to see a lot of good momentum around addressing like the early stage capital needs, right? But I do think that we need more support for first-time entrepreneurs, like during the execution journey. I was talking with one of my colleagues at Coupa about this, and we even have some of our own initiatives that we're doing that I look forward to, sharing with you around creating, public directory for minority businesses, and again, directing some of those trillions in spend, and we'll talk more about that. But I think that part of the problem is like once we get the money problem fixed, so there's a lot of light being shed on the gap between, minority founder funding and non-minority funding. I think we're starting to see a lot of momentum there, but I think once we get the money, right? Once the founders get the money, then what? Like, I think there needs to be resources to wrap their arms around the entrepreneurs, right? On that journey. I mean, and provide like feedback, don't hold back, just be straight, right? Don't be shy. We need more experienced entrepreneurs that have gone from startup to exit, right? Because that's where the valuable insights will come from, and the lessons learned. Like I said before, I want to share my experiences with as many as possible, because don't bump your head if you don't have to. right?
Right.
Save those lumps. If you can avoid the mistakes that I made, then do that. And because we're gonna make mistakes, but like make different mistakes, like make mistakes that I haven't made, so I know not to make those next time, right? That's my my 2 cents.
Yeah. It's
What is
funny when, hey, I mean, I'm a little bit tortured about, part of me is like, God, I want Rod to stay at Coupa and bring this stuff global and make this incredible impact. And then part of me is like, oh my gosh, this guy's had a successful exit. Get back in there and let's do another one. Because, that's what great ecosystems have. They have founders that have done it multiple times. We've got some wonderful success stories, but there's just not that many of them. And so that's why we think about how do we import them from the outside, but whether it's on the inside or the outside,
Yep.
We're all really excited about this new territory that you're opening up. I am so incredibly bullish on this space. I think about it more than just supplier diversity and inclusion. I think about it as the new accountability.
Yeah.
And I do believe that, I think there's growing commitment to this before recent events, but I think in a very healthy way, there's a different accountability principle at work here. And so I think that's a huge opportunity. And I would love to see this move much more into the consumer side as well. I don't know why we can't. I'm trying to find, you and I need to go recruit a team to develop that app that not only is a green filter, but also an inclusion filter when you're buying products. It's not a technology barrier. It's just a little bit of creative thinking about how you would create that experience for the buyer, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And it's only a matter of time. I see it hitting, like a ton of bricks, right? I mean, consumers want that information.
Yeah.
Well,
Now,
you do see it. Yeah, you do see like Walmart had a campaign for a while where I don't know if they are going to continue it or not, but like they had a section in their stores that had woman-owned products, like they
yeah.
had logo. So I can definitely see it happening more and more.
But I'm thinking about an app where you walk into the store and it will take you directly to the products where the boards have diversity, where,
Yeah.
and this is, it could build on the database that you built from more of a B2B perspective, but we'll have to have a hack on this. But Rod, we've got a pretty diverse group listening in. We've actually got quite a few high school and college kids that are part of this summer program. Any final words of advice for entrepreneur, or potential entrepreneurs from a, just, words of optimism, encouragement, before we sign off?
Yeah, I say if you have a vision, if you have an idea, don't be afraid to share it. For one, oftentimes people they're afraid to share their idea. They think someone's going to steal it because if you truly have a passion for it, no one's going to be able to do it like you, for one. And then I would say that be patient. If you decide to pursue entrepreneurship, it's not for everybody, but I tell you what, it is, it's challenging at the same time. It's so extremely rewarding. But you have to be patient, and it takes perseverance, right? And don't be afraid to ask for help. Like I definitely feel like we have these resources around us now here in the greater Cincinnati community. And, don't be shy about reaching out to, Pete or, heck for that matter, and me or anybody else. I think we're all a part of the same family. And I think if a startup succeeds in Cincinnati, then we all succeed.
Outstanding. Well, listen, Rod, from family grilling insights and business how-to in Florida to reinventing a marketplace and supplier diversity and inclusion, we're so lucky to have you here. We're lucky to have your insights, and we hope to continue working with you. Thanks for joining us, and we'll probably get a lot of questions and we'll route them to you. But thanks again so much for being such an important contributor to our community.